Hello, my favorite English language learners. It is your favorite English teacher here, Amy Joy. Have you ever noticed that I spell favorite without a U? This is because I am an American English teacher and not a British English teacher. And so in this video, I'm going to share 10 differences between American and British English that you might not know about. And before we begin, I would like to recognize that there is not one type or standard of British English. Since there are several different countries in the UK, there are many different versions spoken. And if you learn or speak British English, then feel free to correct or expand on any of the examples I share today. Although I am an expert in American English, I can always improve my knowledge of British English. So with that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk about differences in vocabulary. For example, Americans will call this a cookie, whereas in the UK, it is a biscuit. In the US, this is an eggplant or an aubergine. And I actually had to look up the pronunciation of this word because I have actually never said aubergine before. Here we have French fries in the US, or also known as chips in the UK. But confusingly, these are actually called chips in the US, but in British English, they are called crisps. This is a diaper or a nappy, and in the United States, this is called a sweater, but in the UK, you will hear jumper. Now, some other differences related to vocabulary are our collocations with have and take. For example, in the US, we often say to take a bath, take a shower, take a break, take a vacation, or take a rest. But I recently learned that in British English, you can use take or the verb have. Now, in American English, it is not wrong to use have with these words. It is just more common to use take. And the third difference I have noticed between American and British English is the word math and maths. This word refers to the field of study of numbers and calculations, and it is short for mathematics. Now, I really started to notice this when my students were introducing themselves and saying they were majoring in maths. And I was very confused because in the US, we never put an S on the end of math. But then I realized that these students had been learning British English in international schools or had British teachers. And if you happen to be studying in the United States, I recommend that you say math without the S because it sounds very funny, unnatural, and foreign to us to hear the word maths. And I would even say that most Americans don't know that it is called maths over in the UK. But something to note is even though the British version does have an S on the end, this word remains singular. It is not plural. So you would not say maths are my favorite subject. You can simply say math or maths is my favorite subject. Okay, and our next difference related to vocabulary is in our use of modal verbs, specifically shall, mustn't, and needn't. As an American, I very rarely use the verb shall, and almost never in my whole life have said mustn't or needn't. Instead, we are more likely to use words like should, let's, don't, or do you want. So in the US, we might say, do you want to go to dinner? Or in British English, shall we go to dinner? In the US, you will hear let's go, and in the UK, you might hear shall we go? Or I am more likely to say, don't forget your passport, instead of you mustn't forget your passport. Or in the US, you will hear, oh, you don't need to do the dishes, you're our guest. But in Great Britain, you might hear, you needn't do the dishes, you are our guest. Again, as an American, I don't think I've ever said mustn't or needn't. To us, it sounds very formal, very proper, and yes, very British. However, from what I've heard, shall, mustn't, and needn't are much more popular in the UK. Now, I do hear the word shall used sometimes in the US, but it is definitely not as common as in the UK. And when I hear it, it's usually in the phrase, shall we go? And when I hear it, it gives me a sense of playfulness or maybe even joking, like, shall we go? It makes the conversation feel very lighthearted, and I think this is because we understand how formal it is, and to say it sounds a little bit unnatural to us, which is why it is almost said in a joking manner. Okay, and before we move on to differences in grammar, I want to remind you if you are studying for the TOEFL, the IELTS, or just want to build your English vocabulary, then you might be interested in my ebook, In this book, I teach you 75 useful advanced words that I use as a native English speaker. I teach you not only the words, but their collocations and grammar, so you not only understand the words, but can also use them in your daily life and maybe on your next English exam. So after watching this video, go check out my website, yourfavoriteenglishteacher.com, and buy my ebook today to expand your advanced vocabulary. Okay, now, let's take a look at some differences in grammar. And one of the biggest differences in grammar is our use between the simple past and the present perfect. Now, this actually confused me when I first started teaching English, because as a teacher, I was told to share with students that we use the present perfect when there is a completed action in the past that relates to the present. And this actually confused me because in many examples, I myself would choose to use the simple past. So this grammar rule didn't really make sense to me. And you will see this difference in sentences with the adverbs using just, already, and yet. So for example, if someone asks me, "What are you doing right now?" I might say, "Oh, I just finished class and now I'm going home." Now, according to the British English explanation of this rule, since the person is asking what you're doing right now, the fact that you have just finished your class is related to the present, even though it's in the past. But for me, this explanation was so confusing because in American English, I would simply use the simple past and say, "I just finished." Here's another example. In American English, someone might ask me, "Have you taken your exam yet?" Or "Did you take your exam yet?" And I would reply, "Yeah, I already took it." Notice here that in the question form, you can use the present perfect or the simple past, but in my answer, I am more likely to use the simple past with the adverb already. Yeah, I already took it. But in British English, if someone asks you, "Have you already taken your exam?" you would probably respond, "Yes, I've already taken it." And one last example, if someone asks me, "Hey, what's wrong?" I would say, I lost my keys and I'm running late." But in British English, you might hear, I've lost my keys and I'm running late, using the present perfect. And another difference between American and British English grammar is our use of the word gotten or got. In American English, the past participle of the verb get is gotten. So our little chart looks like get, got, gotten. But in British English, the past participle remains got. Get, got. So as an American, I use gotten all the time. For example, "Have you gotten your grades back yet?" Or "Your baby's gotten so big." Or "His English has gotten better since moving to the US. But in the UK, you might hear, "Have you got your grades back?" "Your baby has got so big." Or "His English has got better since moving to the UK. And one more difference between American and British English grammar is our verb forms with collective nouns. Now, you might remember that a collective noun is a word that describes a group with many members. For example, family, faculty, team, board, staff, etc. All of these words refer to groups of people made up of individual members. And in the United States, we always use the singular form of the verb with these nouns. For example, my family is visiting for the holidays, the faculty is having a meeting, or the team decides on the best solution. In the US, we see these groups of people as a single unit. Even though the group has individual members, we see it as a whole group, and that group is one thing, which is why we use the singular verb. However, in British English, you actually can use either the singular or the plural form of the verb. And it really depends on what you want to emphasize, whether you are viewing the group as one single unit or if you are thinking about each person as an individual. So you can say, "My family is or are visiting for the holidays," or "The faculty is or are having a meeting," or "The team decide or decides on the best solution." Now, I have also heard another rule related to this in British English, that if the group is disagreeing on something or they are not working in unison, then you are more likely to use the plural form of the verb because this emphasizes each individual as making a distinct choice. For example, "The team disagree on the best solution." Since each person is thinking for themselves, you are emphasizing the fact that there are many groups group members, and so you will choose the plural form of the verb. Now, there is one exception to this, which is the word police. In both American and British English, you will use the plural form. For example, the police are investigating the crime. Now, the last difference I want to share is related to spelling. And one major difference is the ed or the t ending in the simple past forms of verbs. In American English, we more often use the ed ending opposed to the t ending. But in the words burned and dreamed, we actually also use burnt and dreamt. So either one are okay in American English. However, when it comes to the word learned, we never use the T on the end. And I often see my students who have attended international schools or had British teachers use learnt, which to me sounds very proper and very British, but also very unnatural in the United States. And another difference in spelling is how Americans drop or delete the E before adding suffixes onto their words. For example, in the words like aging, judgment, and likable. But in British English, you can see that they keep the E before those endings. Now, this was actually new and a big relief to me when I found this out, because for me personally, I always struggled spelling the word judgment. I always wanted to keep the E in the middle, and I didn't know why. I could have sworn that I had seen judgment with an E in the middle before, but my spell checker always told me that I was wrong. Well, once I found out that this was British English, I felt much better because it validated that I am sure I have seen this word spelled with an E in the middle before, and I wasn't completely wrong. Okay, and our last difference between American and British English spelling is in the endings of OR and OUR. For example, in the words like behavior, color, and neighbor. In the US, we simply spell it with an OR, whereas in the UK, the words will end with OUR. And once again, this is why I spell favorite, Favorite. Now, let me know in the comments, are you learning American or British English? Do you have a favorite accent? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so you can keep improving your American English with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.